Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Otaki Ward Councillor. But gosh, you seem to have a lot of jobs piling up, James. I've heard that they are grafting together operations and strategy. Is this correct?
Yeah, so look, previous training we had Strategy and Policy Committee, which is the committee that I chaired, and we had Operations and Finance, which was the committee that Councillor Michael Scott chaired. And then the third committee or meeting we had was the full council, which the mayor chairs. So those are three main committees. This triennium, we had a little bit of a restructure. Obviously, we've brought in the portfolios,
yes,
and so different councillors have portfolios in the areas of interest or strengths. And instead of having three main committees, we've got two. We've got full council, which naturally the mayor and at times the deputy mayor will chair. And then we've got strategy and operations instead of strategy and policy. So strategy and operations is a combination of the strategy and policy committee and the operations and finance committee. So quite a big committee,
yeah.
And I've taken on the challenge of chairing that. Had our first meeting this Thursday, this week.
Sounds like a lot of work to me. It also sounds to be contradictory, because my understanding is that strategy is that high-flowing stuff up the top where you're setting all the goals and you're having the overview, whereas operations is down and dirty and actually doing it. Isn't there a conflict here?
No, I see what you're saying, but not at all. But one of the things that we also have moved to do is just change the timing of the meetings. One thing that we found frustrating as a council was sometimes a paper coming to the wrong committee, and the reason was that the weeks between the next committee was just too long, and so we ended up going up to full council. Essentially, strategy and operations, they'll talk about the beach bylaw was one that we spoke about last week. That's going to be a big one for this triennium. And then towards the end of the meeting, the down and dirty, as you said, is simply reporting back on the activity. And look, in some ways it sort of dovetails quite nicely into the high level, what we're going to do, down to the low level, what we've done. So, in a sense, you could say it's complementary.
Well, let's hope so. And, of course, you mentioned the portfolios, which is the innovation this time around. I have a bone to pick with you.
You go for it. Join
you possibly know that Councillor Halliday has got the portfolio of older people. So we had a meeting the other day, and the Councillor Halliday turned up and introduced himself. And then he was off on a jolly bus trip, which I think you organised. So we didn't have a time to indoctrinate him, to train him up properly. However, there's been a lot of bus trips recently for the councillors. What's up with that?
Yeah, so look, those happen every triennium. I wasn't responsible for them, although I was responsible for slipping a couple of little options in on there to bring some of the councillors up to speed. Look, that happens every triennium, and it's to familiarise the councillors, particularly the new councillors, with council's facilities, its assets. Obviously, the wastewater treatment plant, the pools and so forth. So when we're actually sitting in the council chamber deliberating or talking about an upgrade to a pump system or a sports field, Aotearoa Park, councillors have actually been there and have been aware of it and sort of familiarised themselves with it. So not all councillors attended all of them. I wasn't able to make one of the trips, but it's my fifth term, so I've taken over them a number of times.
You've probably been on a bus trip and you know what a pump looks like.
Yeah,
and
but
really,
I think they're good.
Fine. And I suppose that what we're talking about here, this nuts and bolts stuff, the assets, we've talked already this morning about the library in Waikanai, about the community centre, both of those buildings are in trouble. And those kind of issues, I know it's not very sexy, but it's that and the roads and the sewerage and all of that kind of day-to-day stuff that really is the essence of council, isn't it?
Yeah, look, absolutely, and I guess that's a little bit of the frustration for elected members. I mean, particularly with the library, we make governance decisions, and so if we're not aware of the information and in regards to the library, the condition of the library, then we're not in a position to make a decision on it. And that's something that I had mentioned in the briefing we had from Morrison and Lowe, who did the review on the state of the Waikanai Library, and simply saying that councillors can only make decisions based on the information they had before them. And I mean, I don't know if you've read the report, but the report identifies sort of some systemic issues over a number of years, and then sort of been seen in isolation rather than seeing in totality. And obviously we've ended up with a situation with the library being closed.
Since we're talking about this, do you think there should be provision for whistleblowing? Because it appears that channels of communication, which in bureaucracies are quite strictly enforced, it seems that channels of communication could well be an issue and maybe stopping you from finding out what's really happening at ground level.
So look, I'm not against whistleblowing. I mean, in the principle of, we look at central government, and then obviously in the United States it's been raised as well more recently. I don't think the Morrison and Lowe report showed a culture of people not wanting to raise things to anyone's attention. If you actually go back or anyone goes back and reads that report, that's not something that came out of that independent review of that situation as being an issue or a cause of the problem in terms of no one wanting to say anything. And I think even the independent review that I initiated, I would be surprised whether that shows up that as a concern.
However, I mean, red flags were raised, concerns were expressed some time ago that did not reach you.
Yeah, so I guess it's been challenging for me because obviously I was a community board member at the time. I wasn't a councillor, and so when I say that, it's not to try and wash my hands of it, but just to say that you're not in all of the meetings or briefings. But if I'm kind of putting my hand up and taking responsibility here, I was aware that there were, I guess, leaks at the buildings at times. I think the bigger issue with that Waikanae one was, and I think the one that kind of clouded the decisions or the judgment was this whole combined approach with the gallery and the library. So, it's that whole constantly not wanting to waste ratepayers' money by spending money on a facility that's likely going to be pulled down and, next year or the year after we're going to be building this big library gallery type thing. So, I think as the Mayor said, as fair as that it's been an issue of creep. This is, years of issues that have just sort of been piled up. And, when I saw the report on the Waikanae Library with the photos of all of the interior and, the mould and bits and pieces, although I said earlier that I'd been aware there'd been leaks in the building, I'd never been aware of the extent of it to that, And look, I own a commercial building in Otaki, and that's had a leaking roof. My tenant in there's made me aware of it, and I'm aware of the extent of that. Whereas in the instance of the Waikanae Library, I don't think elected members were made fully aware of the extent of the issues, and I think that's partly because even the organisation itself didn't know. It was sort of piece by piece rather than... It's like a jigsaw puzzle where it's sort of pieces of the puzzle rather than the whole puzzle put together.
No, I'm not suggesting there's any great plot. I do think, however, that there's an element of trying to get away with it because you do mention that there are grand plans for Waikanae and you don't want to spend good money after bad, perhaps. Maybe that was the philosophy.
Yeah, and look, the other thing that came through the report, and this is the irony in all this, and I'm not making excuses or saying what has happened is right. I think we could have and should have done better, and I think the organisation has learnt from it. But, the report does also talk about an attitude of austerity, and that's the irony in this. Yes. Council staff and in instances, I guess, elected members trying to keep rates down, trying not to spend more money, unintentionally have created that situation there, by not spending money. So that's certainly an issue that we're going to have to discuss. Yes. And what at least I've said, and I know other councillors have said, was that's an issue for governance to decide. You bring that matter forward to the table and we'll make the call about whether there's the appetite to spend money on fixing that.
And here's where I think the systemic issue is, that you've got people like me, as you know, I've presented to Council on behalf of that proportion, that large, twice the national average proportion of our ratepayers who are on fixed incomes, and saying, you can't do this. You're going away in a different orbit to the people who are on fixed incomes. And so it's people like me and others who've made the point that rate rises are causing considerable concern to people, that in a way it is us that are causing that pressure. So I think it is a systemic issue. We've got to find different ways of making money and alleviating the bills that have to be paid.
Yeah, look, if you haven't read our submission to the Productivity Commission, I'd really encourage you to do so. I agree with you. I've long said that I think the system is broken. I think the system of simply relying on rates and ratepayers to keep basically increasing rates year on year to fund is unsustainable. That being said, if I'm being critical of our own organisation, we've got to perform well, and
yep.
Obviously I initiated that independent review. I think there's many things that we're doing fantastic as an organisation, but equally, there are, I can think of occasions where we could have saved money, but that's sort of small in comparison to the bigger issue that you've raised, and it goes back to the submission that I referred to, the Productivity Commission. If you look at the government surplus that they have, which is massive and compared to local councils, central government could fix this issue very simply by allowing a portion of that surplus across councils all across the country. If you look at the plan that we've put forward to the Productivity Commission, we could potentially not have rate rises for the next, I think it's like 10 years. It's certainly a number of years, just by them allowing us to have a share, a small percentage of their tax take.
Great stuff. That's a great conversation for next time. James, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much.
All the best to you. James Cootes.
106.3 Beach FM.